The crystal chandeliers of Ashworth House cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as Miss Penelope Whitford stood at the periphery of London's most exclusive ballroom, observing the glittering spectacle of the Tun with the detached fascination of a scholar studying exotic specimens. At 38, she had long ceased to harbour illusions about her place in this world of silk gowns and whispered gossip. She was the cautionary tale, the woman who had dared to remain unmarried past her prime, and society never let her forget it. "Poor Miss Whitford," came the familiar whisper from a cluster of matrons near the refreshment table, their voices pitched just loud enough to ensure she heard every cutting word. Still attending these events at her advanced age, one would think she'd have learned to accept her circumstances by now. "Quite shameful, really," agreed another voice, dripping with false sympathy. 38 years old and still harbouring such unrealistic hopes. It's rather pathetic, don't you think? She should retire to the countryside and spare us all this uncomfortable display." Penelope's spine straightened imperceptibly, but her expression remained serene, a mask she had perfected over 2 decades of social warfare. Her deep emerald silk gown was elegant but understated, her auburn hair arranged in a style that was fashionable without appearing desperate for attention. She had learned long ago that any attempt to stand out only invited crueler sport from the Tun's sharp-tongued matrons. "Miss Whitford," Lady Ashworth approached with that particular smile that promised nothing good. "How persistent of you to attend tonight. Still hoping for divine intervention, I see." "Good evening, Lady Ashworth," Penelope replied with perfect composure, though her heart clenched at the barely concealed mockery. "Thank you for the invitation. Your ballroom is magnificent as always." "Indeed, though I must confess I'm always rather surprised to see you at these gatherings. Most ladies of our particular circumstances prefer quieter pursuits. But then, you always were rather stubborn in your choices, weren't you?" The word stubborn hung in the air like an accusation. In the Tun's carefully coded language, it was synonymous with a woman who refused to accept her fate gracefully, who persisted in hoping when hope was deemed inappropriate. Penelope had been called far worse things, but the casual cruelty still stung like a physical blow. "If you'll excuse me," Penelope said quietly, "I believe I'll take some air in the conservatory." She escaped through the French doors, grateful for the humid warmth of the glass-walled garden room and the blessed silence it offered. Here, surrounded by exotic plants and the gentle sound of a small fountain, she could finally drop her carefully maintained composure. The conservatory overlooked the Ashworth Gardens, where moonlight cast silver shadows across the autumn landscape. Penelope closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of honest pain. 38 years old, and still the subject of society's cruel entertainment. She had long since abandoned hope of marriage, of love, of the family she had once dreamed of having. But attending these events had become a matter of principle. She refused to let them drive her into exile, simply because she didn't conform to their narrow definition of acceptable womanhood. "Magnificent specimens, aren't they?" Penelope's eyes flew open at the sound of a deep, cultured voice. She turned to find a man standing near an impressive collection of orchids, his back partially turned to her. Even in silhouette, she could see he was tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in evening attire that spoke of both wealth and exquisite taste. "I beg your pardon," she said, suddenly conscious of her solitude with a stranger. "I didn't realize anyone else was here. Please, don't let me disturb your sanctuary," the gentleman said, turning toward her with a slight smile. "I was seeking the same escape from the festivities that you were, I suspect." Penelope's breath caught as the moonlight, streaming through the glass ceiling, revealed his features. This was no ordinary gentleman. This was Duke Sebastian Hawthorne, the wealthiest and most powerful man in all of England. At 35, he was devastatingly handsome, with dark hair that caught the silver light, piercing grey eyes, and the kind of aristocratic bearing that made other men seem like pale imitations. "Your Grace," she said, dropping into a curtsy that she hoped concealed her shock. "I should return to the ballroom immediately. I didn't mean to intrude upon your solitude." "Miss," he prompted gently, making no move to dismiss her. "Whitford, Miss Penelope Whitford." Ah, something flickered in his expression. Recognition, though not the kind she was accustomed to receiving. "You're the lady who authored the treatise on botanical classification that was published in the Royal Society's journal last year." Penelope stared at him in amazement. She had indeed published that paper, under her own name, despite the scandal it had caused among the Tun. Most of society had either ignored it entirely or used it as further evidence of her unwomanly eccentricity. You actually read it?" she asked, unable to hide her astonishment. "I did indeed. It was absolutely brilliant. One of the most comprehensive analyses of plant taxonomy I've encountered in years. Your observations on the relationship between environmental factors and morphological adaptation were particularly insightful." Penelope felt heat rise in her cheeks. When had anyone last complimented her intellect rather than pitying her circumstances? "Thank you, Your Grace, though I fear most of society found it rather inappropriate for a lady to pursue such scholarly interests." "Then most of society is composed of fools," Duke Sebastian said with such conviction that Penelope felt something flutter in her chest, something she had thought long dead. "Intelligence should be celebrated, not condemned, especially intelligence as remarkable as yours." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the ball drifting in from the ballroom like distant music. Penelope found herself studying the Duke's profile, noting the strong line of his jaw, the way the moonlight caught in his dark hair. He was everything she was not, young, beautiful, sought after by every ambitious mother in London. "May I ask you something, Miss Whitford?" he said suddenly, turning to face her fully. "Of course, Your Grace. Why do you attend these events? Forgive my directness, but you seem rather ill at ease among the company inside." Penelope considered lying, offering some polite deflection, but something in his manner encouraged honesty. "Because I refuse to surrender," she said simply. "They would prefer I disappear entirely, retire to some cottage in the countryside, and spare them the discomfort of my continued existence. But I won't give them that satisfaction." Duke Sebastian's grey eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You speak as though you're at war." "Aren't I?" Penelope asked with a bitter smile. "A 38-year-old spinster who dares to show her face in polite society. Who writes scholarly papers and expresses opinions. Who refuses to accept that her life is over simply because she never married." "Yes, Your Grace, I am very much at war." "Then you're a warrior," he said softly, and there was something in his voice that made her heart skip. "And a formidable one at that." The words hit Penelope like a physical blow. When had anyone called her formidable in admiration rather than condemnation? When had anyone seen her continued presence in society as strength rather than pathetic desperation? "I should return inside," she said, suddenly overwhelmed by the conversation, by his presence, by the impossible kindness in his voice. "Thank you for the conversation, Your Grace." "The pleasure was entirely mine, Miss Whitford," he replied, bowing formally. "I do hope we'll have occasion to speak again soon." As Penelope made her way back through the ballroom, she felt as though she were walking in a dream. The Duke of Hawthorne, the wealthiest, most powerful man in England, had not only spoken to her with respect, but had actually read and appreciated her work. It was more than she had dared hope for in years. But as she caught sight of the cluster of young beauties surrounding the refreshment table, all of them no doubt hoping to catch the Duke's attention when he returned inside, reality crashed back down upon her like a cold wave. Whatever kindness he had shown her in the conservatory was simply that, kindness. A moment of polite conversation with a pitiful spinster, before he returned to the serious business of choosing a bride from among the season's diamonds. The whispers followed her as she made her way toward the exit, but for once, Penelope barely heard them. Her mind was full of piercing grey eyes and words that had made her feel for just a moment like she was something more than society's cautionary tale. The pursuit of substance. 3 days after the Ashworth ball, all of London society was buzzing with speculation about Duke Sebastian Hawthorne's matrimonial intentions. At 35, he had successfully evaded the marriage trap for over a decade, but his position as the wealthiest man in England made him the ultimate prize. His vast estates, his influence in Parliament, his connections to the Crown, all of it would belong to whatever fortunate young lady managed to capture his attention. "He must marry soon," declared the Marchioness of Blackwood at her weekly salon. "The succession depends upon it, and he certainly had ample opportunity to choose from the finest young ladies of the past several seasons." "Lady Victoria is the obvious choice," suggested Mrs. Fairfax, referring to their hostess's daughter. "Beautiful, accomplished, and her dowry is substantial. They would make a magnificent match." "Or perhaps Miss Isabella," countered Lady Pemberton. "She's barely 19, fresh from the schoolroom, and absolutely stunning. The Duke seemed quite taken with her at my musicale last week. Duke Sebastian himself was notably absent from these discussions, having retreated to his study in Hawthorne House to escape the constant parade of hopeful mothers and their daughters. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, attempting to focus on correspondence from his estate managers, but his thoughts kept drifting to a pair of intelligent green eyes and a conversation that had challenged every assumption he held about society and its expectations. Miss Penelope Whitford was unlike any woman he had ever encountered. While the young beauties of the ton simpered and flattered, speaking only of fashion and gossip, she had engaged him in genuine intellectual discourse. Her paper on botanical classification had demonstrated a mind of remarkable depth and insight, yet she was dismissed by society as a figure of ridicule simply because she remained unmarried at 38. The injustice of it rankled him more than he cared to admit. "Your Grace?" His secretary entered with the morning's invitations. "The Duchess of Marlborough has requested your presence at her garden party tomorrow afternoon. She's particularly eager for you to meet her granddaughter, who has just made her debut this season." "Another introduction to another eligible young lady, I presume?" Sebastian asked dryly, not looking up from his papers. "I believe that was the implication, Your Grace." Sebastian set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. The endless parade of debutantes had become tedious beyond measure. Each one was beautiful, accomplished in the prescribed feminine arts, and utterly predictable. They spoke in platitudes, thought in clichés, and offered nothing that could engage his mind or challenge his assumptions. "Tell me something honestly, Richards," Sebastian said to his secretary, a man who had served the family for decades. "Do you think I'm a fool for not having married by now?" Richards considered the question carefully. "I think, Your Grace, that you're a man who values substance over superficiality. Perhaps you simply haven't found a lady who matches your intellectual requirements. And what if such a lady exists but is considered unsuitable by society's standards? Then society's standards are flawed, Your Grace." Sebastian smiled at the diplomatic response. "Indeed they are. Send my regrets to the Duchess. I have other plans tomorrow afternoon." What those plans were, Sebastian wasn't entirely certain, but he knew they didn't involve another tedious introduction to another vapid young beauty who would giggle and blush and offer nothing of substance to the conversation. Instead, he found himself thinking about Miss Whitford's paper, about the passion and intelligence that had shone through every carefully crafted argument. He had heard she was something of a recluse, rarely venturing into society except for the occasional ball or musicale. But perhaps there were other venues where a lady of her intellectual interests might be found. The Royal Botanical Society, for instance, was hosting a lecture on exotic plant species that very afternoon. The Meeting of Minds. The Royal Botanical Society's lecture hall was sparsely populated, filled mostly with serious botanists, university professors, and a handful of dedicated amateur naturalists. It was not the sort of venue that attracted fashionable society, which made it all the more surprising when Duke Sebastian spotted a familiar figure seated in the third row, her attention completely absorbed by the speaker's discussion of tropical orchid cultivation. Miss Penelope Whitford sat with perfect posture, her forest green wool dress practical rather than fashionable, a leather-bound notebook in her lap, where she occasionally jotted down detailed observations. She was, Sebastian realized, probably the only woman in attendance, yet she seemed completely at ease in the academic environment. He made his way quietly to the seat beside her, noting the moment she became aware of his presence. Her green eyes widened in surprise, but she quickly composed herself and offered a polite nod of acknowledgement. "Your Grace," she whispered, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Nor I you," he replied softly. "Though I should have realized that the author of such an insightful paper would be interested in the latest developments in botanical science." A faint blush colored her cheeks at the compliment, and Sebastian found himself fascinated by the way it transformed her features. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense. Her face was too angular, her features too strong for current fashion. But there was something compelling about her, an intelligence and depth that made the simpering beauties of the ton seem like pale shadows in comparison. When the lecture concluded, they walked out together into the afternoon sunlight, continuing their discussion of the speaker's theories on orchid propagation and environmental adaptation. "I found his conclusions about symbiotic relationships particularly fascinating," Penelope said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Though I think he underestimated the importance of soil composition in successful cultivation." "You speak from experience?" Sebastian asked, genuinely intrigued. "My late father left me a small estate in Surrey," she explained. Nothing grand, but it includes extensive gardens that I've been using as a sort of natural laboratory. I've been experimenting with creating optimal growing conditions for various exotic species. Sebastian stared at her in amazement. You manage your own estate. Why shouldn't I? Penelope asked, a note of defensiveness creeping into her voice. I'm perfectly capable of understanding soil composition and plant biology. Just because I'm an unmarried woman doesn't mean I'm helpless. I didn't mean to suggest you were, Sebastian said quickly. Quite the opposite. I'm impressed. Most ladies of my acquaintance couldn't tell you the difference between a rose and a tulip, let alone conduct sophisticated botanical experiments. Most ladies of your acquaintance are probably 20 years younger than I am, and have been raised to believe that appearing helpless is attractive to gentlemen, Penelope replied with a bitter smile. I passed the age where such pretenses serve any purpose long ago. They had reached the street where their carriages waited, but neither seemed eager to end the conversation. Sebastian found himself reluctant to return to his empty townhouse and the stack of invitations from hopeful mothers. Miss Whitford, he said impulsively, would you do me the honor of taking tea with me? I find myself eager to continue our discussion, and I suspect my cook would appreciate having someone to serve other than myself. Penelope hesitated, clearly torn between desire and propriety. Your Grace, it wouldn't be appropriate. An unmarried lady taking tea alone with a gentleman. Then we'll leave the drawing-room doors open and ensure my housekeeper is present, Sebastian said earnestly. Please, Miss Whitford. I can't remember the last time I had such an intellectually stimulating conversation. Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she nodded slowly. Very well, Your Grace, but only for a short while. Hawthorne House was a testament to generations of wealth and power, its elegant rooms filled with priceless art and furnishings that spoke of centuries of aristocratic privilege. But Sebastian led her not to the formal drawing room, but to his private study, a more intimate space lined with books and comfortable chairs. I hope you don't mind the informality, he said, as his housekeeper brought in the tea service with obvious curiosity about this unexpected guest. But I thought you might appreciate seeing my collection of botanical texts. I have several rare volumes that might interest you. For the next 2 hours, they discussed everything from plant classification to conservation efforts, from the latest scientific discoveries to the philosophical implications of Darwin's emerging theories. Penelope's knowledge was extensive, her opinions well-informed and passionately expressed. She challenged his assumptions, offered new perspectives, and made him think about familiar subjects in entirely new ways. You're extraordinary, he said finally, as the afternoon light began to fade through the tall windows. Absolutely extraordinary. Penelope set down her teacup with hands that trembled slightly. Your Grace, please don't what? Speak the truth. Miss Whitford, in all my years in society, I have never met a woman with your intelligence, your passion, your depth of understanding. You put every diamond of the ton to shame. I'm 38 years old, Penelope said quietly, her voice thick with pain. I'm a spinster, a figure of ridicule, a cautionary tale whispered about in drawing rooms. I'm not someone a man like you should be saying such things to. A man like me. Sebastian leaned forward in his chair, his grey eyes intense. What kind of man am I, Miss Whitford? Wealthy, powerful, titled. You could have any woman in England, any young, beautiful woman who could give you everything society expects. Why would you waste your time with someone like me? Because, Sebastian said softly, his voice filled with conviction, you're the first woman I've met who makes me want to be worthy of intelligent conversation, because when I'm with you, I feel truly engaged for the first time in years, because you see the world not as it is but as it could be, and you have the courage to work toward that vision. Penelope stared at him, her green eyes wide with disbelief. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying, Sebastian replied firmly. I'm saying that I find you fascinating, brilliant, and utterly captivating. I'm saying that I would rather spend an afternoon discussing botanical science with you than attend a dozen balls filled with empty-headed beauties who have nothing to offer beyond their youth and conventional prettiness. Your Grace, Penelope rose from her chair, clearly agitated. This is impossible. You must see that, even if you meant what you're saying, which I can hardly believe, society would never accept it. A duke and a 38-year-old spinster, it would be the scandal of the century. Let them talk, Sebastian said, rising as well. What do I care for their opinions? You should care, Penelope said firmly, backing toward the door. You have responsibilities, duties, expectations to fulfill. You need an heir, a young wife who can give you children and carry on your family name. You can't throw all of that away for whatever this is. And what if I don't want the conventional path? What if I want something more than duty and obligation? What if I want a partner, an equal, someone who challenges me and inspires me to be better than I am? Penelope shook her head, her face pale with emotion. You're not thinking clearly. This is madness. I should go. Penelope, Sebastian said, using her given name for the first time, his voice soft and pleading. Please don't run from this. Don't run from me. But she was already at the door, her hand on the handle. Thank you for the tea, Your Grace, and for the conversation. But this cannot happen again. She fled before he could stop her, leaving Sebastian alone in his study with the lingering scent of lavender and the devastating realization that he was falling in love with the most unsuitable woman in all of England. The storm of scandal. Word of the Duke's visit to the Royal Botanical Society spread through London society like wildfire, though the details became increasingly distorted with each telling. By the time the story reached the drawing rooms of Mayfair, it had transformed from an innocent shared interest in botanical science to a clandestine assignation of the most scandalous nature. I heard he spent the entire afternoon with her, whispered Lady Pemberton to her circle of friends, her voice carrying just enough to ensure maximum distribution of the gossip. Alone in his study, with the doors closed, the impropriety of it. But surely you're mistaken, protested Mrs. Fairfax, though her eyes gleamed with the excitement of fresh scandal. The Duke would never. That is, with Miss Whitford? She's nearly 40 if she's a day, and hardly the sort of woman to attract a man of his caliber. Nevertheless, my dear, I have it on excellent authority. My lady's maid sister works at Hawthorne House, and she swears the Duke entertained her for hours. Tea was served in his private study, and they were heard laughing together like old friends. The speculation grew more vicious with each repetition, and by the time it reached Penelope's ears, the innocent afternoon had been transformed into something sordid and shameful. Miss Whitford, her elderly housekeeper said with obvious distress, wringing her hands as she entered the morning room where Penelope was attempting to read, "There are people saying terrible things about you and His Grace. Surely it's not true. You wouldn't. That is, you're far too sensible to involve yourself in such a scandal." Penelope felt her heart sink as she realized the magnitude of what had happened. In her naivety, she had thought their intellectual connection could exist in a vacuum, separate from society's cruel judgments. But she should have known better. A woman of her age and status could not be seen in the company of an eligible duke without inviting the worst possible interpretations. "It was perfectly innocent, Mrs. Hartwell," she assured her housekeeper. "We discussed botanical science, nothing more. But I fear the damage is already done." Indeed it was. Within days, Penelope found herself completely ostracized from the few social circles that had previously tolerated her presence. Invitations that had once arrived regularly ceased entirely. Former acquaintances crossed the street to avoid speaking to her. The whispers that had always followed her became openly hostile. "The audacity of that woman," she heard Mrs. Thornton declare at the lending library, her voice pitched to Carrie. "To think she could ensnare the Duke with her pathetic wiles. At her age, it's positively shameful." "Someone should warn His Grace," replied her companion with malicious satisfaction. "These desperate spinsters will stop at nothing once they catch the scent of a title. Mark my words, she'll be claiming he compromised her next." Penelope fled the library in humiliation, her cheeks burning with shame. This was worse than anything she had endured before. Previously she had been merely pitied or ignored. Now she was actively reviled, painted as a predatory fortune hunter who had somehow entrapped the innocent Duke. Meanwhile, Sebastian was facing his own social consequences. His mother, the Dowager Duchess, had summoned him for what proved to be the most uncomfortable conversation of his life. "Sebastian," she said, her voice icy with disapproval as he entered her elegant drawing room, "I have been hearing the most disturbing rumors about your recent associations. If you're referring to my friendship with Miss Whitford, then yes, I imagine you have," Sebastian replied calmly, though his jaw was tight with suppressed anger. "London society does so enjoy its gossip. Friendship?" The Dowager's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Is that what you call entertaining a 38-year-old spinster in your private study? Sebastian, what were you thinking?" I was thinking that I had met an intelligent, accomplished woman whose company I enjoyed, Sebastian said firmly. Miss Whitford is a published scholar, a successful estate manager, and one of the most insightful people I've ever encountered. I fail to see why her age or marital status should preclude our friendship. Because, his mother said with exaggerated patience, you are the Duke of Hawthorne. Your every action is scrutinized, your every association analyzed for its potential impact on the family name. You cannot simply befriend whomever you please without considering the consequences. And what consequences are those exactly? The tongue is already whispering that you've lost your mind, that this woman has somehow bewitched you with her desperate schemes. They're saying she's a fortune hunter, a pathetic creature who has deluded herself into thinking she could capture a duke. Sebastian's jaw tightened with anger. Miss Whitford is nothing of the sort. She has her own estate, her own income. She neither needs nor wants my fortune. Then what does she want, Sebastian? Because I assure you, no woman of her age associates with a man of your position without some ulterior motive. Perhaps, Sebastian said quietly, his voice dangerous in its control, she simply enjoys intelligent conversation with someone who appreciates her mind rather than dismissing her because of her circumstances. The dowager studied her son's face with growing alarm. Sebastian, you cannot possibly be developing feelings for this woman. Tell me I'm wrong. Sebastian met his mother's gaze steadily. I find Miss Whitford to be an extraordinary person. If that troubles you, I'm sorry, but I won't apologize for recognizing worth where others see only what they choose to see. This is disastrous, the dowager said, sinking into her chair as if the weight of the scandal might crush her. Sebastian, you must end this association immediately. The damage to your reputation, to the family name, it could be irreparable. My reputation will survive, Sebastian said firmly, rising from his chair. And if the family name is so fragile that it cannot withstand my friendship with a respectable woman, then perhaps it's not worth preserving. He left his mother's house with her protests ringing in his ears, but his resolve only strengthened. The ton's reaction to his association with Penelope had revealed the ugly truth about the society he had been born into, its superficiality, its cruelty, its complete inability to recognize true worth. But it had also shown him something else, how much Penelope meant to him. The thought of her facing society's scorn alone, of her being painted as a desperate fortune hunter when she was anything but, filled him with a protective fury he had never experienced before. He was going to court Miss Penelope Whitford properly and openly, regardless of what society thought. And if that created a scandal, so be it. Some things were worth fighting for. The very next day, Sebastian began his campaign in earnest. He sent flowers to her townhouse, not the typical roses that young ladies received, but exotic orchids that spoke to her botanical interests. With them came a note. These specimens reminded me of our fascinating conversation about adaptation. I hope they bring you as much joy as your company brought me. When Penelope tried to return the flowers, Sebastian persisted. He sent rare botanical books, scientific journals, and beautifully illustrated volumes on plant species from around the world. Each gift came with a thoughtful note that demonstrated his genuine appreciation for her intellect and interests. Your Grace, Penelope's housekeeper said one morning, surveying the latest delivery of books and specimens, perhaps you should receive the Duke. He's clearly not going to give up, and the neighbors are beginning to talk about all these deliveries. That's precisely why I cannot receive him, Penelope replied, though her heart ached at the thought of turning away the one person who had ever truly appreciated her mind. Don't you see? Every gift, every gesture only adds fuel to the gossip. I'm already being painted as a fortune hunter. If I encourage his attentions, perhaps, Mrs. Hartwell said gently, you should consider what you want, rather than what others might think. It was a radical suggestion for a woman who had spent her entire adult life carefully managing her reputation, but it planted a seed of possibility in Penelope's mind. What did she want? For the first time in years, she allowed herself to consider the question honestly. She wanted to feel valued for her mind, rather than pitied for her circumstances. She wanted intellectual companionship, stimulating conversation, and the respect of an equal. She wanted to matter to someone, to be seen as more than society's cautionary tale. And if she were completely honest with herself, she wanted Sebastian Hawthorne, his brilliant mind, his kind heart, his unwavering respect for her intelligence. The thought terrified her, but it also filled her with a longing she had thought long dead. And the courtship begins. Sebastian's persistence finally wore down Penelope's defenses when he appeared at the small bookshop near Bloomsbury, where she regularly purchased her scientific journals. She had thought herself safe from society's scrutiny in this quiet corner of London, but there he was, browsing the natural philosophy section as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Your Grace," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you cannot keep doing this. You're only making things worse for both of us." "How am I making things worse?" Sebastian asked, turning to face her with genuine confusion. "I'm simply trying to spend time with a woman whose company I enjoy." "You know very well how," Penelope replied, glancing nervously at the other patrons who were watching their interaction with obvious fascination. "The gossip, the speculation, it's becoming unbearable." "Then let's give them something real to talk about," Sebastian said impulsively, the words escaping before he could stop them. "Marry me, Penelope." The words hung in the air between them, shocking them both. Sebastian hadn't planned to propose, not here, not like this, but the moment the words left his lips, he realized they felt absolutely right. Penelope stared at him in horror, her face draining of color. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," Sebastian said, his voice low and urgent. "Marry me, Penelope. Let me show the world what I see when I look at you, not a spinster or a figure of ridicule, but an extraordinary woman who deserves to be cherished." "Sebastian," Penelope whispered, using his given name for the first time, her voice barely audible. "You don't understand what you're asking. I'm 38 years old. I can't give you children. I can't give you the young, beautiful wife that society expects. I would ruin you. You would save me," Sebastian countered, stepping closer despite the curious stares of other customers. "Penelope, I've spent my entire adult life going through the motions of what was expected of me. I've attended balls and flirted with debutantes and played the role of the eligible bachelor, but I've never felt truly alive until I met you. You challenge me, inspire me, make me want to be better than I am. But the scandal will fade," Sebastian said firmly. "But my feelings for you won't. Penelope, I love you. Not despite your age or your circumstances, but because of who you are. Intelligent, passionate, brave, extraordinary. I love the way your eyes light up when you talk about something that fascinates you. I love your fierce independence, your refusal to let society define your worth. I love that you see possibilities where others see only problems." Penelope felt tears streaming down her cheeks, unable to contain the emotion his words unleashed. "You don't know what you're saying. You're caught up in the novelty of it all, the excitement of defying expectations. But when the reality sets in, when you realize what you've given up, the only thing I would be giving up is a life of emptiness and pretense," Sebastian said, his voice filled with conviction. "Penelope, please, give us a chance. Give me a chance to prove that love is more important than society's expectations." "I need time," Penelope whispered, her voice breaking. "I need to think." "Take all the time you need," Sebastian said gently, resisting the urge to reach for her hand. "But know this, I'm not going anywhere. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to believe that you deserve to be loved." The decision of a lifetime. The weeks that followed Sebastian's unexpected proposal were a torment of indecision for Penelope. His words had shaken her to her very core, forcing her to confront feelings and possibilities she had long since abandoned as impossible dreams. Could she really believe that this extraordinary man loved her? Could she risk her heart on what might be nothing more than a temporary infatuation with the forbidden? The gossip had reached fever pitch. Every newspaper carried veiled references to the Duke's unsuitable attachment, and the betting books at White's were filled with wagers on whether he would actually go through with such a scandalous match. The ton was divided between those who thought him temporarily mad and those who believed he was being manipulated by a clever fortune hunter. "Miss Whitford," her solicitor said during one of their regular meetings, his expression grave with concern, "I feel I must advise you that your reputation has suffered considerably from these rumors. Perhaps it would be wise to consider retiring to your estate in Surrey until the gossip dies down." "And let them drive me into exile?" Penelope asked with a flash of her old spirit. "I think not, Mr. Davidson." But privately she was beginning to waver. The constant whispers, the pointed snubs, the cruel laughter that followed her wherever she went, it was taking its toll on her spirit. Perhaps it would be kinder to Sebastian to simply disappear, to remove herself as a source of scandal and allow him to return to his proper place in society. It was her housekeeper who finally provided the clarity she needed. "Miss Penelope, the elderly woman said one evening as they sat by the fire in the small sitting room. "May I speak plainly?" "Of course, Mrs. Hartwell. You know you may always speak your mind with me. I've watched you for nigh on 15 years now, ever since you came to London as a young lady full of hope and dreams. I've seen you endure disappointment after disappointment, rejection after rejection, and through it all, you've maintained your dignity and your principles. You've never compromised who you are to please society." "What's your point?" Penelope asked gently, though she suspected she knew where this conversation was leading. "My point is that His Grace sees in you what I've always seen, a woman of rare worth and character. And if you turn him away now because you're afraid of what people will say, you'll be doing the very thing you've never done before. You'll be letting them win." The words hit Penelope like a revelation. All her life, she had refused to bow to society's expectations, had insisted on living according to her own principles rather than their narrow definitions of acceptable behavior. Why should she stop now, when the stakes were higher than they had ever been? The next morning she sent a note to Hawthorne House. "Your Grace, if your offer still stands, I would be honored to accept. P.W." Sebastian's response came within the hour, delivered by a footman who could barely contain his excitement. "My darling Penelope, my offer will stand until the end of time. May I call upon you this afternoon to discuss our future? Yours always, S." When Sebastian arrived that afternoon, Penelope was waiting for him in her small but elegant drawing room, dressed in her finest gown, a deep emerald silk that brought out the fire in her auburn hair and the intelligence in her green eyes. "You're certain?" Sebastian asked as soon as they were alone, his grey eyes searching her face for any sign of doubt. "Because once we announce our engagement, there will be no going back. The scandal will only intensify." "I'm certain," Penelope said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I've spent 20 years letting society dictate my choices, letting their opinions determine my actions. I won't do it anymore. If you truly want me, Sebastian, then I'm yours." Sebastian crossed the room in 3 quick strides and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness he had been holding back for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and trembling. "I love you," he whispered against her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "I love you too," Penelope replied, marveling at how natural the words felt on her lips. I never dared hope." "Hope, my darling," Sebastian said, framing her face with his hands and looking into her eyes with such intensity that she felt her soul laid bare. "Hope for everything. We're going to be so happy together, Penelope. I promise you that." As they sat together planning their future, discussing everything from the wedding ceremony to their shared dreams for the estate, Penelope felt a peace she had never known before. Yes, there would be scandal. Yes, there would be those who would never accept their union, but for the first time in her life, she was choosing love over fear, happiness over propriety, and it felt absolutely right. The wedding of the century. The announcement of their engagement sent shockwaves through London society that reverberated for months. The newspapers were full of speculation, the drawing rooms buzzed with gossip, and the betting books at the gentlemen's clubs saw frenzied activity as wagers were placed on everything from the likelihood of the wedding actually taking place to how long the marriage would last. "It's absolutely scandalous," declared Lady Pemberton at her weekly salon, her voice shrill with indignation. "A duke of his standing, marrying a woman old enough to be, well, certainly old enough to know better. What can he be thinking? Perhaps he's thinking with his heart rather than his head," suggested a younger voice from the back of the room, though it was quickly shouted down by the majority. "Hearts are all very well for novels," sniffed Mrs. Thornton, "but dukes have responsibilities. He needs an heir, and she's far too old to provide one. Mark my words, he'll come to his senses before the wedding." But Sebastian showed no signs of coming to his senses. If anything, the public announcement seemed to have liberated him from any remaining doubts. He was seen everywhere with Penelope, at the opera, at gallery exhibitions, at scientific lectures that no fashionable couple would normally attend together. He seemed determined to show the world that his choice was deliberate and joyful. "You're radiant," he told Penelope one evening as they walked through the gardens of his estate outside London, where they had retreated to escape the worst of the gossip. "I've never seen you look so beautiful." "I feel beautiful when I'm with you," Penelope replied, marveling at the truth of the statement. "You make me see myself through different eyes." "I make you see yourself through honest eyes," Sebastian corrected, stopping to turn her toward him. the eyes of someone who loves you exactly as you are. They had decided on a small private ceremony at Sebastian's estate chapel, with only close family and friends in attendance. Penelope had no family left, except for a distant cousin, who had already made it clear that she disapproved of the match, so the guest list was mercifully short. The Dowager Duchess had initially threatened to boycott the wedding entirely, but Sebastian's quiet determination had eventually worn down her resistance. She still didn't approve, but she loved her son enough to support his choice, however reluctantly. "I don't understand it," she confided to her closest friend the night before the wedding. "But I've never seen Sebastian so happy. Perhaps there's something to be said for marrying for love rather than duty." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, with early summer sunshine streaming through the ancient windows of the chapel. Penelope stood before her mirror, hardly recognizing the radiant woman who looked back at her. Her wedding gown was elegant, but not ostentatious. Ivory silk with delicate pearl embroidery, her grandmother's emeralds at her throat, her auburn hair arranged in a style that was both sophisticated and romantic. "You look like a queen," Mrs. Hartwell said with tears in her eyes. "His Grace is the luckiest man in England." "I'm the lucky one," Penelope replied softly, her voice filled with wonder. I never dared dream that I could be this happy." The chapel was small and intimate, filled with the scent of roses and the warm glow of candlelight. As Penelope walked down the aisle, alone, as she had chosen, a final assertion of her independence, she saw only Sebastian waiting for her at the altar, his face transformed by a smile of such pure joy that it took her breath away. "Dearly beloved," the vicar began, but Penelope barely heard the familiar words. She was lost in Sebastian's grey eyes, in the wonder of this moment that she had never thought would come. When it came time for their vows, Sebastian surprised everyone by setting aside the traditional words and speaking from his heart. "Penelope," he said, his voice strong and clear, carrying to every corner of the small chapel, "you have taught me that true worth has nothing to do with age or society's expectations. You have shown me what it means to love someone not for what they can give you, but for who they are. I promise to cherish your brilliant mind, to support your dreams, to stand by your side against whatever challenges we may face. I promise to love you not despite our differences, but because of them. You are my equal, my partner, my greatest blessing." Penelope's own vows were equally heartfelt. "Sebastian, you saw value in me when I had almost given up seeing it in myself. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable, believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. I promise to be your partner in all things, to challenge you when you need challenging, to support you when you need support. I promise to love you with all my heart for all my days, and to never let society's opinions diminish what we have built together." When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Sebastian's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of all the love and happiness that lay ahead. As they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, the small congregation rose in genuine celebration of a love that had triumphed over every obstacle. The wedding breakfast was held in the estate's elegant dining room, where toasts were made and well-wishes offered. Even the Dowager Duchess, who had been so opposed to the match, found herself moved by the obvious happiness of the newlyweds. "I may not understand this union," she said quietly to Sebastian, as they stood together watching Penelope discuss botanical matters with one of the guests, "but I cannot deny that you have found something rare and precious. She makes you happy in a way I have never seen before." "She makes me complete, Mother," Sebastian replied simply. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." As the sun set over the estate, casting golden light across the gardens, Sebastian and Penelope stood together on the terrace, finally alone as husband and wife. The scandal that had consumed London society for months seemed very far away now, replaced by the quiet contentment of two souls who had found their perfect match. "Do you regret it?" Penelope asked softly, her hand in his as they watched the last light fade from the sky. "Choosing scandal over convention? Marrying the spinster instead of the diamond?" Sebastian turned to face her, his eyes serious and tender. "Penelope, my love, you were never the spinster. You were always the diamond, the rarest, most precious gem in all of England. It just took the right light for everyone else to see your brilliance." The legacy of love. 5 years had passed since the scandalous wedding that had shocked London society, and the Duke and Duchess of Hawthorne had become living proof that love could indeed conquer all obstacles. Their unconventional love story had captured the imagination of the public, and their obvious happiness together had begun to change minds even among the most conservative members of society. "I must admit," confessed Lady Pemberton at her salon, her tone considerably more humble than it had been years earlier, "I was quite wrong about the Duke's choice. Have you seen them together? The way he looks at her, the way she lights up when he enters a room, it's quite extraordinary. And she's done wonders for his estates," added Mrs. Fairfax. "I heard she's implemented revolutionary agricultural methods that have increased yields by 40%. The tenants positively worship her." Indeed, Penelope had thrown herself into her new role with characteristic passion and intelligence. She had transformed the management of Sebastian's vast holdings, implementing the progressive farming techniques she had long advocated. More than that, she had established schools for the tenant children, improved housing conditions, and created a system of healthcare that was being studied and copied by other progressive landowners. But perhaps their greatest achievement was the scholarship program they had established for young women seeking education in fields traditionally denied to them. The Hawthorne Foundation had already sent dozens of brilliant young women to universities across Europe, and their graduates were beginning to make their mark in medicine, science, and literature. "Your Grace," their secretary announced one afternoon as Penelope worked in her study, surrounded by applications from hopeful young scholars, "you have a visitor. A young lady from Edinburgh who says she's travelled specifically to thank you." The visitor was Miss Catherine Morrison, a brilliant young woman who had become the first female graduate of Edinburgh's medical school thanks to a Hawthorne scholarship. Her research into botanical medicines was already saving lives in London's hospitals. "Your Grace," Catherine said, her eyes bright with gratitude and determination, "I wanted to thank you personally, not just for the scholarship, but for showing me that it was possible to succeed despite society's expectations. You've changed my life, and through my work, I hope to change others." As Sebastian entered the study, having just returned from Parliament where he had been advocating for women's educational rights, Penelope felt a profound sense of satisfaction. They had created something beautiful together, not just their own happiness, but a legacy that would outlive them both. "Do you ever regret it?" Sebastian asked that evening as they walked through their gardens, now famous throughout England for their innovative botanical research. Choosing scandal over convention? Marrying the spinster instead of the diamond? Penelope turned to face him fully, her green eyes serious and tender. "Sebastian, my love, you were never choosing a spinster. You were choosing a woman who had been overlooked by everyone else. And I was never a diamond. I was something far rarer. I was a woman who refused to let society define her worth." Sebastian pulled her into his arms, marveling as he did every day at how perfectly she fit against him. "You were always the most precious gem in all of England. It just took the right light for everyone else to see your brilliance." As the sun set over their estate, casting the gardens in shades of gold and amber, the Duke and Duchess of Hawthorne stood hand in hand, surrounded by the fruits of their love and their shared commitment to changing the world. Their story had begun with society's mockery and skepticism, but it had evolved into something far more significant than a simple romance. They had created a revolution, not just in their own lives, but in the lives of countless others who had been inspired by their courage to choose love over convention, substance over superficiality, and hope over despair. The woman who had been ignored in ballrooms and judged for refusing to bow to society's expectations had indeed found love with the wealthiest duke in England. But more than that, she had found her voice, her power, and her purpose. Together, they had proven that the grandest love stories are born not from conformity, but from the audacity to be different, and that true love sees worth where others see only failure. Their legacy would continue long after they were gone. In every woman who refused to accept limitations, in every couple who chose love over convention, in every person who dared to believe that it's never too late to begin again, to find love, to change the world. The spinster and the Duke had become something far greater than the sum of their individual parts. They had become proof that the most extraordinary transformations begin with the courage to be extraordinary, and that love, when it is true and deep and brave, can indeed move mountains. 10 years later, as they sat together in their library, surrounded by the letters and achievements of the young women they had helped educate, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She was now 48, her auburn hair touched with silver, but her eyes still sparkled with the intelligence and passion that had first captured Sebastian's heart. "Look at this," she said, holding up a letter from one of their scholarship recipients. "Miss Eleanor has been appointed as the first female professor of chemistry at Oxford. Can you imagine? When we started this program, such a thing would have been unthinkable." Sebastian smiled, his own hair now showing threads of silver at the temples. "You've changed the world, my darling, one brilliant mind at a time." "We've changed the world," Penelope corrected, as she always did. "This was never just my vision, Sebastian. It was ours." As they prepared for bed that night, Sebastian watched his wife brush her hair in the mirror, marveling at how beautiful she remained to him. Not the conventional beauty that society prized, but the deeper beauty of a woman who had found her purpose and lived it fully. "Do you know what I love most about our story?" he asked, coming to stand behind her. "What's that?" "That it proves love doesn't have an expiration date. That the most beautiful chapters of our lives can begin at any age. That worth isn't measured by youth or conventional beauty, but by the depth of one's character and the strength of one's convictions." Penelope turned in his arms, her green eyes soft with emotion. "And that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that defy every expectation, that challenge every convention, that prove love truly can conquer all." Their kiss was tender and full of the deep affection that had only grown stronger with time. As they held each other, both reflected on how their scandalous beginning had blossomed into something far more meaningful than either had ever dared imagine. The transformation of society, the influence of the Duke and Duchess of Hawthorne, extended far beyond their own estates. Their marriage had become a symbol of progressive thinking, inspiring other couples to challenge social conventions and marry for love rather than duty. More importantly, their educational initiatives had begun to transform the very fabric of English society. "Your Grace," announced their secretary one morning, entering Penelope's study with an expression of barely contained excitement, "you've received a most extraordinary invitation. Her Majesty the Queen requests your presence at Buckingham Palace. She wishes to discuss expanding your educational programs throughout the Empire." Penelope looked up from the architectural plans she had been reviewing for a new women's college, her eyes wide with amazement. "The Queen herself? Indeed, Your Grace. It seems your work has caught the attention of the highest levels of government. There's talk of establishing similar institutions in Scotland, Ireland, and even the colonies." When Sebastian learned of the royal summons, his pride in his wife's achievements was evident. "You've done something remarkable, Penelope. You've made it impossible for society to ignore the capabilities of women. Even the Crown recognizes the value of what you've built." The meeting at Buckingham Palace was a triumph beyond Penelope's wildest dreams. Queen Victoria, herself a woman who had defied expectations by ruling in her own right, was deeply interested in the Hawthorne educational model. "Duchess," the Queen said as they sat in her private drawing room, "your work has come to our attention through the remarkable achievements of your scholarship recipients. We are particularly impressed by the young lady who has developed new surgical techniques that are saving lives in our military hospitals." "Miss Sarah Hartwell," Penelope replied with obvious pride. "She was one of our first graduates. Her innovations in battlefield medicine have indeed been revolutionary. We wish to discuss the possibility of establishing similar institutions throughout our realm," the Queen continued. "The Empire would benefit greatly from the intellectual contributions of its female subjects, properly educated and trained." The conversation that followed would change the course of women's education throughout the British Empire. By the time Penelope left the palace, she had been appointed as the Crown's official advisor on women's educational initiatives, with a mandate to establish institutions from Edinburgh to Bombay. "How does it feel?" Sebastian asked that evening, as they celebrated with champagne in their drawing room, "to have gone from society's pariah to the Queen's advisor in the span of a decade?" "Surreal," Penelope admitted, still struggling to process the magnitude of what had occurred. 10 years ago I was dismissed as a pathetic spinster. Now I'm being asked to reshape education for half the Empire." "You deserve every bit of recognition you're receiving," Sebastian said firmly. "Your vision, your persistence, your refusal to accept society's limitations, it's all led to this moment." But even as they celebrated, Penelope remained focused on the work ahead. The Royal Commission would require her to travel extensively to establish new institutions, to train teachers and administrators. It was a daunting task, but one that filled her with purpose. "I'll need your support more than ever," she told Sebastian. "This work will take me away from home for months at a time. Are you prepared for that?" "My darling," Sebastian replied, taking her hands in his, "I've been prepared to support your dreams since the moment I fell in love with your brilliant mind. Wherever this work takes you, whatever it requires, I'll be by your side." The global impact. Over the next 5 years, the Hawthorne Educational Initiative expanded across the British Empire and beyond. Penelope travelled from Edinburgh to Dublin, from Bombay to Sydney, establishing institutions that would educate thousands of young women in fields previously denied to them. Each new school brought its own challenges. In India, she worked with local reformers to create programs that respected cultural traditions while expanding opportunities for women. In Australia, she established research facilities that took advantage of the continent's unique flora and fauna. In Ireland, she created agricultural colleges that would help modernize farming techniques while providing women with practical skills. "Your Grace," said Dr. Catherine Morrison, now one of Penelope's closest collaborators, as they stood in the newly opened Bombay Women's Medical College, "when I first met you 10 years ago, I never imagined our work would reach this far." "Nor did I," Penelope admitted, watching as young Indian women conducted experiments in the state-of-the-art laboratory. "But that's the beauty of education. It spreads like seeds on the wind, taking root in places you never expected." The global expansion of their work had also strengthened Penelope and Sebastian's marriage. Traveling together, working towards shared goals, they had become true partners in every sense of the word. Sebastian's business acumen and political connections proved invaluable in navigating the complex bureaucracies of the empire, while Penelope's vision and expertise shaped the educational programs themselves. "Do you realize," Sebastian said one evening as they stood on the deck of a ship returning from India, watching the sunset paint the ocean in brilliant colors, "that we've now educated over 3,000 women across 4 continents? And each one of them will educate others," Penelope replied, her voice filled with satisfaction. "The ripple effects will continue for generations." Their work had not gone unnoticed by other progressive thinkers around the world. Letters arrived regularly from reformers in America, France, and Germany, seeking advice on establishing similar programs. The Hawthorne model had become synonymous with innovative education that challenged traditional gender roles. "Your Grace," their secretary announced one morning, "you've received an invitation from the University of Paris. They wish to award you an honorary doctorate and invite you to speak at an international conference on women's education." It was the first time a British woman had been so honored by a French institution, a recognition of how far Penelope's influence had spread. The conference brought together educators, reformers, and government officials from across Europe and America, all eager to learn from the woman who had revolutionized women's education. "Mesdames et messieurs," Penelope began her address to the packed auditorium, speaking in fluent French, "we gather today not to discuss whether women are capable of advanced education, but how best to provide them with the opportunities they deserve. The question is no longer if we should educate our daughters as fully as our sons, but how quickly we can make this vision a reality." The standing ovation that followed lasted for nearly 10 minutes, and the conference proceedings would be published and distributed throughout the civilized world, spreading Penelope's ideas even further. Chapter 9. The Next Generation. As Penelope approached her 50th birthday, she began to think about succession and legacy. The institutions she had built were thriving, but they needed strong leadership to continue growing after she was gone. "I've been thinking," she told Sebastian one evening, as they walked through the gardens of their estate, now expanded to include research facilities and a small residential college for advanced students, "about establishing a formal training program for educational administrators. We need to ensure that the next generation of leaders shares our vision and values." "An excellent idea," Sebastian agreed. "Who did you have in mind to lead such a program?" "Dr. Morrison, certainly. Miss Eleanor Blackwood has also shown remarkable leadership skills in her work with the Irish colleges. And there's a young woman in Australia, Miss Margaret Sinclair, who has been doing innovative work with Indigenous communities." The training program they established became known as the Hawthorne Fellowship, bringing together the most promising graduates of their institutions for advanced study in educational theory and administration. The Fellows, as they came to be known, would go on to establish their own schools and colleges, spreading the Hawthorne philosophy even further. "Your Grace," said Miss Sinclair during her first visit to England, "the Aboriginal women in our program have developed techniques for preserving traditional knowledge while incorporating modern scientific methods. Their work on native plant medicines is revolutionary." That's exactly what we hope to achieve, Penelope replied with obvious pride. Education should build on existing knowledge and traditions, not replace them. The success of the fellowship program attracted attention from unexpected quarters. The American suffragette movement invited Penelope to speak at their conventions, recognizing her as a pioneer in women's rights. Progressive politicians in various countries sought her advice on educational reform. Even the Pope granted her an audience, curious about her methods for educating women while maintaining moral standards. "You've become something of a celebrity," Sebastian observed with amusement, as they reviewed the latest batch of invitations and requests for interviews. "I've become a symbol," Penelope corrected. "A symbol of what women can achieve when given the opportunity. That's both a privilege and a responsibility." Chapter 10. The Golden Years. As they entered their 60th decade, both Sebastian and Penelope began to slow down slightly, though their passion for their work remained undiminished. The Hawthorne Foundation now operated over 50 institutions across 6 continents, and their graduates were making their mark in every field from medicine to engineering to literature. "Your Grace," their newest secretary announced one morning, "you've received a letter from Miss Catherine Morrison. She's been appointed as the first female Dean of Medicine at Cambridge University." Penelope smiled with deep satisfaction. Catherine had been one of their first scholarship recipients, and her journey from unknown student to dean of one of the world's most prestigious universities embodied everything they had worked to achieve. "And there's more news," the secretary continued. "Miss Eleanor Blackwood has been elected to Parliament in Ireland, the first woman to hold such a position there." "Remarkable," Sebastian said, reading over the letters. "Our little revolution has grown into something far greater than we ever imagined." The recognition continued to pour in. Universities across the world offered honorary degrees, governments sought their advice on educational policy, and progressive organizations celebrated their achievements. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. "Your Grace," announced their butler one afternoon, "you have visitors, a delegation of young women from various Hawthorne institutions. They say they have something special to present to you." The delegation was led by Dr. Morrison, now in her 40s, and one of the most respected medical professionals in Europe. With her were graduates from institutions across the empire, doctors, scientists, engineers, teachers and writers, all of whom owed their careers to the opportunities the Hawthornes had created. "Your Graces," Dr. Morrison began, her voice thick with emotion, "we have come together to present you with something that represents our collective gratitude. We have established the Penelope and Sebastian Hawthorne Prize for Educational Innovation, to be awarded annually to individuals who continue your work of expanding educational opportunities for women." The first recipient, they announced, would be a young woman in China who had established a network of schools for girls in rural villages, using methods she had learned during a fellowship year in England. "You see," Dr. Morrison continued, "your work has spread far beyond the institutions you directly established. Every woman you educated has gone on to educate others. Every barrier you broke down has made it easier for others to follow. Your legacy is not just in the schools and colleges that bear your name, but in the countless lives that have been transformed by your vision." As Penelope listened to the stories of achievement and progress, she felt a profound sense of completion. The frightened, lonely woman who had stood at the edge of ballrooms, dismissed and ridiculed by society, had become the catalyst for a global transformation in women's education. "When I was young," she said to the assembled group, "I thought my life was over because I didn't fit society's narrow definition of success. I never imagined that my differences, my refusal to conform, would become my greatest strengths. You have all proven that there is no limit to what women can achieve when given the opportunity to develop their talents." Sebastian, watching his wife address the remarkable women whose lives she had touched, felt the same wonder he had experienced in that conservatory 25 years ago. The woman he had fallen in love with for her brilliant mind had indeed changed the world, one student at a time. Epilogue: The Eternal Legacy. As Penelope and Sebastian entered their 70s, they began to spend more time in quiet reflection, surrounded by the fruits of their life's work. The estate had become a pilgrimage site of sorts, with educators and reformers from around the world coming to visit the birthplace of the modern women's education movement. "Do you know what I find most remarkable?" Penelope said one evening as they sat in their library, surrounded by thousands of books and hundreds of letters from grateful graduates. "Is that our love story became so much more than just our love story. It became proof," Sebastian replied. his hair now completely silver, but his eyes still bright with intelligence and affection, that when two people truly love and support each other, they can change the world. Their marriage had lasted over 25 years, defying every prediction of failure. They had never had children of their own, but they had nurtured thousands of intellectual daughters who carried their values and vision into the future. "I have no regrets," Penelope said softly, taking Sebastian's hand in hers. "Not about the scandal, not about the criticism, not about any of it. We chose love over convention, and look what it led to." "The most beautiful love story," Sebastian agreed, "is one that creates more love in the world." As the sun set over their estate for what would be one of their last evenings together, for even the greatest love stories must eventually end, they sat in comfortable silence, knowing that their legacy would continue long after they were gone. The woman who had been ignored in ballrooms and judged for refusing to bow to society's expectations had indeed found the most beautiful love story. But more than that, she had created a love story that would inspire generations of women to believe in their own worth, to pursue their own dreams, and to never accept limitations imposed by others. Their tombstone, in the small chapel where they had been married, bore a simple inscription: "Here lie Penelope and Sebastian Hawthorne, who proved that love sees worth where others see only failure, and that the most extraordinary transformations begin with the courage to be different." But their true monument was not made of stone. It was built of the lives they had touched, the minds they had opened, and the barriers they had broken down. In every classroom where a woman taught, in every laboratory where a woman conducted research, in every hospital where a woman saved lives, the legacy of the spinster and the duke lived on. Their love story had become humanity's story, a testament to the power of seeing beyond society's prejudices to recognize the true worth of every individual. And in that recognition, they had created something far more beautiful than any conventional romance. They had created hope, opportunity, and the promise that love, when it is true and brave and visionary, can indeed change the world. Did this beautiful tale of unexpected love and defiant courage capture your heart? If Penelope and Sebastian's journey from scandal to triumph moved you, please like this story and subscribe for more enchanting historical romances. Share this with someone who believes that love recognizes no age limits and that true worth lies in the soul, not society's expectations. Which moment touched you most? Their first intellectual connection, Sebastian's brave proposal, or their triumph over society's cruelty? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to hit the notification bell for more romantic adventures where love conquers all prejudices and proves that the heart recognizes no boundaries.